Good day, ma'am. My name is Argelene A. Zarate, BS Criminology 2 Block A. Today, I will be discussing my final output for this subject. Quotes of the day. The best way to predict your future is to create it. Classical theories of crime causation. Classical crime theory, especially according to Beccaria, is based on the assumption that people are free of will and thus completely responsible for their own actions, and that they also have the ability to rationally weigh up their abilities. It simply means that there are people who makes their own decisions in life. That's why it turns into a criminal choice. That there are people who are free to make any actions and show their true ability to their places. There A. Rational choice theory. Rational choice theory can apply a variety of areas, including economics, psychology, and philosophy. This theory states that individuals use their self-interest to make choices that will provide them with the greatest benefit. Each individual has its own choices that can be either a good benefit or bad outcomes. There are so many options that people can do their part if their actions would be accepted and help them best. Example, an investor choosing one stock over another because they believe it offers return, like savings, may also be a rational choice. The person involved here is Adam Smith. Adam Smith was one of the first economists to develop the underlying principles of the rational choice theory. B. Routine activity theory. Routine activity theory from Cohen and Felson 1979 emphasized that crime occurs when three elements converge. Number one, motivated offender. Number two, a suitable target. And number three, the absence of capable guardian. This theory includes the routine activities of both offender and victim. It explains that it's all about the person's routine, like they usually make spend their time in activities that put their lives into trouble. Example, if an offender is motivated to commit crime, he or she might not do it if there are many people around. Person involved here is Marcus Felson and Lawrence Cohen. Letter C. Lifestyle theory. Lifestyle theory holds that crime is a developmental process guided by an ongoing interaction between three variables. Number one, incentive, opportunity, and choice. During each phase of the criminal lifestyle, initiation, transitions, maintenance, burnout, or maturity, incentive, opportunity, and choice take on different values and meanings. It explains that it's the personal choice in which the values that they have will change into values that they get from their environment. But if the person is matured enough, they know their own lifestyle and how they engage their personal decisions into the society. Person involved here is Michael J. Hindilang, who was an American criminologist, and Linda Susan Gottfredson is an American psychologist and writer. Number 3, Rafael Garofalo was an Italian criminologist and jurist. Example, someone with a gambling or substance addiction could be as an easy victim by a con artist. Letter D, general deterrence and specific deterrence theory. It is generally accepted that traffic law enforcement influences driving behavior through two processes, general deterrence and specific deterrence. The person involved here is David Carter. David Carter is an American author and illustrator. He is best known for his pop-up books for both children and adults. Example of general deterrence: mandatory license revocation for repeat driving with high intoxicated offenses. Specific deterrence. If an armed robber receives a harsh sentence of 8 years in prison, he will be less likely to commit armed robbery again when he eventually gets out. Victim precipitation theory. The victim precipitation theory suggests that characteristics of the victim precipitate the crime. That is, a criminal could single out of a victim because the victim is of a certain ethnicity, race, sexual orientation, gender, or gender identity. Example, for example, is bullying or peer victimization is most commonly studied in general children and adolescents but also takes place between adults. Letter F. Incapacitation theory. The theory of incapacitation assumes that the state has a duty to protect the public from future wrongs or harms. It prevents future crime by disabling or restricting the offender's liberty, their movements, or ability to commit a further wrong. The most extreme example of incapacitating punishment is the death penalty, imprisonment, curfews, house arrest, electronic monitoring, and disqualification from driving for drunken drivers. Psychological theories of crime causation. Psychological theories are usually developmental, attempting to explain the development of offending from childhood to adulthood, and hence based on longitudinal studies that follow up individuals over time. Example, the issue of human violence is also a major topic within the academic discipline of psychology, psychodynamic theory, and psychosexual stages of human development. Psychodynamic theory, sometimes called psychoanalytic theory, it explains personality in terms of an unconscious psychological process. For example, wishes are fears of which we're not fully aware, and contends that childhood experiences are crucial in shaping adult personality. Person involved here is Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud proposed that personality development in childhood takes place during 5 psychosexual stages, which are the oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital stages. Behavioral theory. Behaviorism focuses on the idea that all behavior are learned through interactions with the environment. Behaviorism is the key for education or educators because it impacts how students react and behave in the classroom and suggests that teachers can directly influence how their students behave. Example, when teachers reward their class or certain students with a party or special treat at the end of the week for good behavior throughout the week. Person involved here is John B. Watson, was a pioneering figure in the development of the psychological school of behaviorism. Second, B.F. Skinner was an American psychologist best known for his influence on behaviorism. Social learning theory. Social learning theory proposed by Albert Bandura emphasized the importance of observing, modeling, and imitating the behaviors, attitudes, and emotional reactions of others. Social theory considers how both environmental and cognitive factors interact to influence human learning and behavior. Example, in everyday life are common, with one of the most evident being the behaviors of children, as they imitate family members, friends, famous figures, and even television characters. Person involved here is Albert Bandura, is an influential social cognitive psychologist who is perhaps best known for his social learning theory. Cognitive theory. Cognitive theory is an approach to psychology that attempts to explain human behavior by understanding your thought processes. The assumption of cognitive theory is that thoughts are the primary determinants of emotions, and behavior. For example, a therapist is using principles of cognitive theory when they teach you how to identify maladaptive thought patterns and transform them into constructive ones. Person involved here is Jean Piaget, was a Swiss psychologist and genetic epistemologist. Jean William Fritz Piaget was born on August 9, 1896 at Switzerland. Moral development theory. Moral development theory that focuses on how children develop morality and moral reasoning. Moral development refers to the process through which children develop the standards of right and wrong within their society. Based on social and cultural norms and laws, moral can be taught in our house or home or even in the environment. It can be taught from our parents, friends, and other people that we interact. For example, is it wrong to steal because the law says it is wrong? Do you ever feel that morally correct decision conflicts with the law? Yes, it can affect our moral development when we were engaging things that can cause into trouble and can affect our life as well. Intergenerational transmission theory. Intergenerational transmission refers to the transfer of individual abilities, traits, behaviors, and outcomes from parents to their children. Economists have largely focused on the intergenerational transmission of educational attainment, earnings and income, wealth, fertility decisions, and welfare receipt. For example, parents' schooling choices may directly impact their children's decision to stay in school. Person involved here is Gary Becker. Premise is that rational economic choices based on self-interest govern most aspects of human behavior. Nigel Thomas, probably based on research interest, economist, political economy, the global political economy. Alternative theory. Alternative theory is a set of statements of principles devised to explain a group of facts or phenomena, especially one that has been repeatedly tested or is widely accepted and can be used to make predictions about natural phenomena. For example, the brain is left unchanged after a night's sleep is unacceptable on its face. Differential association reinforcement theory. Differential association reinforcement theory. Theory was created in 1966. The theory behind differential reinforcement is that people tend to repeat behaviors that are reinforced or rewarded are less likely to continue behaviors that aren't reinforced. A person becomes a criminal because of frequent criminal patterns. For example, if one is exposed to a repeated criminal scenario, this scenario will eventually rub off on others nearby. Person involved here is Edwin Sutherland, was an American sociologist. Eysenck's conditioning theory. Eysenck's theory of criminal personality suggests that personality biologically based at the personality traits include dimension, extroversion, and aneurysm that can be measured using a personality questionnaire. Simply means that this theory defines the personality of each individual, that criminal behavior can be taught in your own way in which how you will be able to interact with others. Person involved Hans Eysenck. He is the best known for his work in the fields of intelligence and personality. Integrated theory. Integrated theory are theories that combine the concepts and the central propositions from two or more prior existing theories into a new single set of integrated concepts and propositions. Integrated hypothesis in which strain leads to frail routine bands to society, which in turn leads to affiliation with freak peer bunches and in this way abnormality. Person involved here is Delbert Elliott, is a distinguished professor emeritus of sociology, research professor in the Institute of Behavioral Science and founding director of the Center for the Study and Prevention of Violence. Maternal deprivation and attachment theory. Bowlby's maternal deprivation hypothesis suggests that continual description of the attachment between infant and primary caregiver could result in long-term cognitive, social, and emotional difficulties for that infant. Bowlby originally believed that effects to be permanent and irreversible. For example, someone who is secure may move through the stages fairly quickly or skip some altogether, while someone who is anxious or avoidant may get stuck on one of the stages. Person involved, John Bowlby, is known as the father of attachment theory. According to Bowlby and his theory, the way a child develops depends on his or her attachment between their primary caregiver. Sociological theories of crime causation. This entry focuses on the three major sociological theories of crime and delinquency: strain, social, learning, and control theories. It then briefly describes several other important theories of crime, most of which represent elaborations of these three theories. For example, violent crime, a crime in which a person is harmed or threatened. Violent crimes include murder, assault, rape, sexual assault, robbery, kidnapping, and harassment. Social disorganization theory. The theory of social disorganization states a person's physical and social environments are primarily responsible for the behavioral choices that a person makes. For example, the theory suggests that the youths from disadvantaged neighborhoods participate in a subculture which approves of delinquency, and that this youth thus acquire criminality in this social and cultural setting. Person involved, Clifford Shaw, as an American sociologist and criminologist. He was a major figure in the Chicago School of Sociology during the 1930s and 1940s. Henry D. Mackay. He and Shaw were both considered members of the Chicago School of Sociology. Concentric zone theory. A diagram of the ecological structure, in the words of its author, represents an ideal construction of the tendencies of any city to expand radially from its central business district. For example, downtown is the business area of the outskirts of town, might be the suburbs. Person involved, Ernest W. Burgess, was a Canadian-American urban sociologist born in Tilbury, Ontario. Anomy theory. The idea of anomy theory means the lack of normal ethical and social standards, the division of labor and society. In this book, Durkheim indicated that the rules of how individuals interact with one another were disintegrating, and therefore people were unable to determine how to act with one another. This is known as normlessness. For example, if the society does not provide enough jobs that pay a living wage so that people can work to survive, many will turn to criminal methods of earning a living. Person involved, French sociologist Émile Durkheim, is in his study of suicide. Strain theory. Strain theory states that certain strains or stressors increase the likelihood of crime. These strains lead to negative emotions such as frustration and anger. These emotions create pressure for corrective action, and crime is one possible response. The major version of strain theory describe one. The particular strains more likely to lead crime, why strains increase a crime, and the factors that lead a person to dissuade a person from responding to strains with crime. For example, individuals experience chronic unemployment may engage in theft or drug selling to obtain money, seek revenge against the person who fired them, or take illicit drugs in effort to feel better. Person involved, Robert K. Merton, was a major contributor to the subfield of criminology. Relative deprivation theory. Relative deprivation refers to inequality, the idea that people are deprived materially or in other ways compared with others in society. The difference is not that people are poorer, but they live in close proximity with people who are much richer. For example, an employee who feels they should have gotten a promotion that went to another employee may feel egoistically relatively deprived. Person involved here is Walter Runciman, was an English and Scottish shipping magnate. He was born in Scottish town of Dunbar. General strain theory. It states that strains increase the likelihood of crime, particularly strains that are high in magnitude, are seen and adjust are associated with low social control and create some pressure or incentive for criminal coping. Examples include parental rejection, criminal victimization, and disparate need for money and discrimination. For several reasons, most notably, they lead to a range of negative emotions which create pressure for corrective action. Person involved, Robert K. Merton, has become one of the leading proponents of structural functionalism and influential figures in modern sociology. Cultural deviance theory. Cultural deviance theory suggests that conformity to the prevailing cultural norms of lower class society causes crime. The mix of cultures and values created a smaller society with different ideas of deviance, and those values and ideas were transferred from generation to generation. For example, instances of vandalism is neutralized when it is deemed untypical mischief, that property is being damaged and it can be easily replaced. I already mentioned the person involved in social disorganization theory, because the person involved in cultural deviance is Clifford Shaw and Henry Mackay. Delinquent subculture theory. According to Cohen, these delinquent subcultures are characterized above all by their deviant values and morals, which enable their members to gain prestige and recognition. For society, they seem deviant, often criminal. In these terms, criminal or delinquent subculture denote systems of norms, values, or interests that support criminal or delinquent behavior. Person involved. Phil Cohen is a British cultural theorist, urban ethnographer, community activist, educationalist, and poet. Differential opportunity theory. The theory of differential opportunities combines learning subculture, anomie, and social disorganization theories and expand them to include the recognition that for criminal behavior, there must also be an access to illegitimate means. For example, the presence of an alarm system prevents the opportunity to commit a crime. Person involved. Richard Cloward. He influenced the strain theory of criminal behavior and concept of ennui. Lloyd Olin was an American sociologist best known for his work on the theory of differential opportunity. Drift theory. Drift theory was originally proposed by Gresham Sykes and David Matza to explain how juvenile delinquents can hold both conventional and deviant rules or values and attitudes. For example, many will still attend church even though they rob drugstores or deal drug. Person involved Gresham Sykes, an American criminologist known for his contribution for the study of delinquency and prisons, 25 October 2021. David Massa is a brilliant sociologist who taught in the Berkeley Department from 1960 until they retired in 1992. Differential association theory. The differential association theory is the most talked about of the learning theories of deviance. This theory focuses on how individuals learn to become criminals, but does not concern itself with why they become criminals. A person becomes a criminal because of a frequent criminal pattern. Person involved here is Sutherland. He was a sociologist of the symbolic interactionist school of thought and is the best known for defining white-collar crime and differential association in general. Containment theory. The theory contends that a series of external social factors and internal qualities effectively insulate certain individuals from criminal involvement, even when ecological variables induce others to engage in crime. Although initially promising, the theory was criticized by some criminologists for various weaknesses. For example, the mothers of the delinquent boys were less likely to be aware of their sons' whereabouts than the mothers of the good boys. Person involved, Walter Reckless. He states that juvenile delinquency commonly arises from a breakdown in moral and social forces. Social bond theory. Social bonding theory is a control theory built upon the assumptions that people are inherently self-interested. Therefore, it seeks to explain why some people refrain from crime rather than engage in crime. For example, because people have formed many relationships with family members and peers over the course of their lives and have unofficially accepted the social conditions and expectations that come with being part of the society. Person involved here is Travis Hershey, known for his social control perspective of juvenile delinquency and his self-control perspective in crime. Social reaction labeling theory. Social reaction theory or labeling theory focuses on the linguistic tendency of majority group to negatively label minority group or those seen as deviant from norms. For example, a person who volunteers to stay late at work is usually seen as worthy of praise, but if a person has been labeled as a thief, people might be suspicious that they will steal something. Person involved, Howard is Becker, known for his studies of occupation, education, deviance, and art. Primary and secondary deviance. Primary deviance is seen to consist of deviant acts with any amount of causes before they are publicly labeled and has only marginal implications for the status and psychic structure of person concerned. Secondary deviance is much more significant because it alters a person's self-regard and social roles. For example, if a gang engage in primary deviant behavior such as acts of violence, dishonesty, or drug addiction, subsequently move to legally deviant or criminal behavior such as murder, this would be the stage of secondary deviance. Person involved, Edwin Limert. Economic theories of crime causation. Economic theories of crime causation. Crime causations. Many social scientists argue that crime is closely related to work, education, and poverty. Thus, the economic theory of crime has focused on sanctions effects and the relationship between work and crime. Economic model of criminal behavior. Basic theory. The economic theory of criminal behavior is an application of the neoclassical theory of demand. It states that potential criminals are economically rational and respond significantly to deterring incentives by the criminal justice system. They compare the gain from committing a crime with its expected cost, including the risk of punishment, the possibility of social stigma. For example, individuals could engage in criminal activities while employed since they have greater opportunities to commit crime. Person involved here is Nobel laureate and Gary Becker. Karl Marx theory. Marxism is a social, political, and economic theory originated by Karl Marx, which focuses on the struggle between capitalists and the working class. Marxism is a social, political, and economic theory originated by Karl Marx, which focuses on the struggle between capitalists and the working class, for example. Let's use, for example, communism. Communist governments, in theory, pay workers according to their ability and needs and remove capitalists by having a strong central government own all property publicly. One example of current communist government is China. Person involved, Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, and William Bonger's theory. In this book, Bonger argued that the capitalist economic structure can have a detrimental influence on society and create criminal behavior and allow it to flourish. Biopsychosocial theories of a crime causation. Psychosocial criminology and psychology are multidisciplinary perspective that attempts to understand criminal behavior and related outcomes like antisocial behavior and its consequences. By considering the interactions between biological, genetics, hormones, physiology, brain structure, or functioning, behavior factors such as lifestyle stress and health beliefs, and social conditions such as cultural influences, family relationship, and social support. Biopsychosocial model of crime causation is an interdisciplinary model that looks at the interconnection between biology, psychology, and socio-environmental factors. The model specifically examines how these aspects play a role in topics ranging from health and disease to human development. For example, let's say Joanne has an accident that leaves her with reduced movement in her right arm. Person involved, George Engel. Moral insanity and criminal responsibility. A mental makeup which renders one, who would not normally be so, substantially incapable of rational conduct constitutes insanity, and in that respect renders the person non-responsible. In the law, we find a theme that is centuries old. Insanity is a condition precluding responsibility. For examples of insanity is jumping out of an airplane without a parachute, the state of being insane, mental illness, or derangement. Premenstrual syndrome. Premenstrual syndrome may be effective as an affirmative defense to a criminal charge if the defendant can show that she was suffering from premenstrual syndrome at the time the crime was committed, and because of her condition, the most common mood-related symptoms are irritability, depression, crying, oversensitivity, and mood swings. Person involved here is Robert T. Frank. Battered child syndrome. Battered child syndrome is defined as the collection of injuries sustained by a child as a result of repeated mistreatment or beating. If a child's injuries indicate intentional trauma or appear to be more severe than could reasonably be expected to result from an accident, battered child syndrome should be suspected. Specific examples include shaking, dropping, striking, biting, and burning. For example, by scalding or touching with cigarettes. Person involved, Dr. C. Henry Kempe. Battered woman syndrome. The battered woman syndrome is psychological term used to describe women who are stuck within or have recently left a violent relationship characterized by the cycle of violence. In short, psychological symptoms develop in some women who are victims of physical, sexual, and psychological abuse. Person involved here is Lenore Walker. Postpartum stress syndrome and postpartum psychosis. When women experience real or perceived traumas before, during, or after childbirth, it can result in chronic and terrifying symptoms. Postpartum psychosis is a very serious mental illness that can affect a new mother. The episode of psychosis usually begins with 1 to 3 months of delivery. Person usually experience this is women who are pregnant, which is they experience usually anxiety. Person involved is Karen Clayman, mental health expert. Hippocrates, ancient Greek physicians. Political social conflict theories of crime causation. Social conflict theories suggest that crime in any society is caused by class conflict and that laws are created by those in power to protect their rights and interests. All criminal acts have political undertones, and Queenie has called this concept the social reality of crime. Example of social conflict theory can be found in a variety of situations, like politics and other social groups that include their rights and interests. Marxist criminology. Marxist criminology views the competitive nature of the capitalist system as a major cause of crime. The poor commit crimes because of their frustration, anger, and need. An example of Marxism is replacing private ownership with cooperative ownership. Person involved, Karl Marx, which essentially attempts to explain the causation of crime based on an ideology and perspective. Conflict theory. Conflict theory focuses on the competition between groups within society over limited resources. Conflict theory views social and economic institutions as tools of the struggles between groups or classes, used to maintain inequality and the dominance of the ruling class. An excellent example in disparity between federal sentencing guidelines for crimes involving powder cocaine and crack cocaine. Person involved, Karl Marx, asserted that all elements in society's structures depend on its economic structure. Social reality of crime. Under this theory of the social reality of crime, crime is held to be a legal definition of human conduct created by agents of dominant class in a politically organized society. Person involved, Richard Queney. Left realism. Left realism is just one of political ideology that focuses on the causes of crime and deviance. Left realists believe that living in a capitalistic society, as in a society where private entities control trade and industry instead of the state, is the main cause for crime. Example, being marginalized means one does not have a voice in society. Example, people who are included from being consumers in a capitalist society sometimes revert to criminal actions, according to left realists. Person involved, Jack Young, John Leah, and Roger Matthews. Postmodern theory. Postmodernism is generally defined by an attitude of skepticism, irony, or rejection toward what it describes as the grant of narratives and ideologies associated with modernism, often criticizing Enlightenment rationality and focusing on the role of ideology in maintaining political or economic power. For example, Pulp Fiction is a postmodern film for the way it tells a story out of the ordinary, upending our expectation of film structure. Person involved, Jean Baudrillard, Gilles Deleuze. Institutive constitutive theory. The constitutive theory states that recognition of an entity as a state is not automatic. This constitutive theory was based on postmodernist concepts of social theory applied to crime and criminal justice, and form a new subfield of critical criminology. Person involved, Dragon Milovanovic, Stuart Henry. Conservatism and liberalism theory. Liberal conservatism is a political ideology combining conservative policies with liberal stances, especially on economic issues but also on social matters, representing a brand of political conservatism strongly influenced by liberalism. Person involved here is philosopher John Locke, philosopher Edmund Burke. Radicalism. Radicalism was a historical political movement within liberalism during the late 18th and early 19th centuries, and a precursors to social liberalism. It identified radicals were proponents of democratic reform in what subsequently became the parliamentary radicals in the United Kingdom. Person involved, William Beckford, Jeremy Bentham, John Cartwright, James Mill, William Molesworth, and Charles Delk. Identity fusion theory. Identity fusion theory possesses that strongly fused individuals feel kin-like bonds with other group members, even one with whom they may have had little or no contact. Person involved here is Henry Tadgefield and John Turner. And that would be all for my final output, ma'am. Thank you and God bless.